Northlane have dropped their newest album, Obsidian.
Into the songs, the legacy has come undone. You said you didn't deserve this. That much you struck a nerve.
Which is their sixth studio album, and apparently this was all independent. No,
Yes.
no record label. Huh? I didn't know that until today.
Which I feel like good for them.
Mhm.
And I don't know what it is with Australian bands and fucking off with their label, but between you and me, also recently left their label, and they were excited to announce that. So it's interesting there. But this has been, I feel like, a really successful album release for not being on a label.
Yeah.
I haven't heard people shut up about this album. Not that they should, but that I feel like it's doing really well and had a lot of promotion, especially from other bands in the scene. Supporting it's bands supporting bands, and looking at these Spotify numbers, only what, like 2 weeks removed from the album release, right?
Something like that.
Yeah. They're doing really well. I mean, the singles put up numbers. Um, Clockwork obviously doing really well, but everything, in the comfortably over 100,000, which for an independent release in this scene is really, really good.
Mhm.
Now, I gotta ask, Jacob, how are you feeling?
This album is not what I expected at all, to be honest.
So what were you expecting then?
I was expecting like an Alien 2.0.
Okay.
What would you call this instead? Is there any comparison?
This is still experimental.
Hmm.
I don't think it's as experimental as Alien. I think like at the start, I start Clarity at the start of the album, and I'm like, am I listening to Northlane? Is like this sounds
Right.
like like I feel like I'm like watching Interstellar going to space or some shit.
Yeah.
And then it kicks in and I'm like, holy shit.
Yeah.
Um and then you just get to like you go through the singles there, and I'm like, these are way better than I remember. And I'm like,
Right?
wait, what is happening right here? I did not like my expectations for this were not great
Yeah.
because I didn't really enjoy the singles, but I think all the singles were actually very safe songs. And then
Mhm.
after you listen to all the singles, you get to, is this a test? And then it's all of a sudden like, oh, here's the experimental shit. People yelling in my house.
Fuck them.
um, yeah, like Zen, I think it's Zen,
Yeah.
is the one where it's just like 2 minutes of instrumental at the end. And yeah, it is. It's just like it feels like Interstellar again, dude. It feels like you're going through a black hole, or it's the I don't know. I think overall Alien is a better album. I think they went into the electronics in a more darker tone than this. This feels, which is kind of funny because this album is called Obsidian.
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
It doesn't feel as dark as Alien.
Yeah, I I like this a lot more than Alien. As somebody who didn't really like Alien, I'm much more of a Node and Mesmer type of Northlane. I really enjoy both of those albums, and Alien felt like a shift that was a lot more experimental that I wasn't really feeling as strongly about.
Mm.
Um, and I think, like you mentioned too, Obsidian is more experimental, I guess, but it's in kind of a different direction.
Yeah,
And
it's like a complete 180 from
yeah,
Alien, I feels like.
yeah,
It's like
and
still electronics, but it's more, I don't even know. I guess like I said, it's not as darkly
it's
toned.
less dark, more cyberpunk almost,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I
Interstellar.
I think yeah, it's a Northlane gone EDM, but also Starset. Like,
Yeah, that's actually a good way of putting it, like
yeah.
Starset.
I I like your point about the singles being better than you remember because I think Clockwork and Plenty are both a hell of a lot better than I remember them being.
Yeah.
Um, and the 3-song run of Inamorata, Obsidian, and Dark Solitaire, I think are probably my 3 favorite songs, especially Inamorata, off this album.
I like
Um,
Zen Cypher Nova.
If I can
those
interject
yeah.
right
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
here very quickly, Inamorata is one of the few songs on this album that I actually liked. I'll touch on that more later. I don't want to ruin you guys' flow right now.
Well, I guess I listened to the first 7 songs on this album, and I was sitting there simultaneously very intrigued by what I was hearing and kept captivated by the fact that this feels new and like Northlane are doing something here that no other band in the scene is
Mhm.
doing. And I was simultaneously bored out of my fucking mind. And I think I felt that way up until right around like halfway through Nova through the end of the album. And to me, I think that this I'm gonna make a comparison here to The Greatest Mistake of My Life by Holding Absence. In that, maybe not to the same degree, I think that this is an album that as a whole, I can take this album and put it up on a pedestal and say, Northlane, 6 albums in, are doing something that feels like Northlane, but also completely different. And I think that
Mhm.
no other band in the scene is doing what Northlane is doing. And this album as a whole is going to advance the band and advance the genre. And I can also then take it off that pedestal and say, I don't like this album as a whole. I think it's maybe in its experimentation drags on at points that it shouldn't, that hurts my personal replayability of the album and the enjoyment of songs as a whole. And I also don't think it helps that I don't really love Marcus Bridges' Uncleans. And not nearly as much as the Cleans anyway, and I think your point about wanting him to do a post-hardcore album
Yep.
is a great one
Dude,
because
after hearing him on that, Thousand Below song,
yeah, yeah, Lost
I'm just like,
Between.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the songs that I enjoy the most on here are the ones that lean into his cleans the most, and,
So do you
you
like
know,
Nova?
I do like Nova. It's not one that I say that I'll listen to regularly, but I appreciated it for the song that it was. It was probably the one that I that you know what, that 3-song run of Zen Cypher Nova, I think is probably the most impressive, even if it's not I didn't save any of them, but it's the one that if I had to pick 3 songs to describe like, "Oh, this is what the album's gonna sound like," it's gonna be those 3.
I think those are the 3 most experimental as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, yeah, for sure. The mission statement, I guess, of this, album would be those 3. I really like Clarity as an opener and Dark Solitaire as a closer.
Yeah,
Um
I think Clarity is the best song on here.
I'm gonna have to give that to Inamorata for me. Um, but in terms of like objectively, yeah, probably you're probably right. Um, yeah, I don't know. I think there each individual song has a moment for me that I really like. It's just either it's too experimental to hurt the individual song replayability, or there's like too frequent uncleans, or they go on for too long. Which is more so a personal preference than a dig at the album. I think that objectively, this is a really good album, like I said, that you could that I think this is gonna be moving forward, 4 or 5 years from now, the same way that people talk about Sempiternal as a
Mhm.
turning point for metalcore, I think that this is going to be one of those albums that we see a trend of bands taking some of the influences of what Northlane is doing here and applying it to their own work. I wouldn't be surprised
A
if this
trend in,
becomes
in
Yeah.
prog metal, yeah.
I think a couple years from now, we see this being hailed as another, like, quote, unquote, "cornerstone album" that
Mhm.
defined a certain aspect of the genre. It's just for me, what they're doing right now, it's working on some songs for me, and it's not working for my own personal tastes in others, so I'm left feeling kind of indifferent. A couple months removed from this album, I'll have a couple songs that I go back and revisit, but I don't see myself wanting to sit down and experience this album again as a whole.
I think, pleasantly surprised
Yeah.
is how I would put it for myself.
Yeah. No, me too, especially with how I was feeling
With
about
the
the singles.
Yeah.
or how we were all feeling, I guess. I feel like for the most part, we all pretty underwhelmed by the singles
Yeah.
when they came out.
That's one way to put it.
That's also one way to put it.
All right, get it out.
Um, so this is my first time listening to a Northlane album in full. And I wanted to go in with an open mind of like, Clockwork was alright. I liked the chorus of Echo Chamber and Carbonized, but that's kind of it. I get halfway through this album and I'm like, in hindsight, did I actually like did I actually like those songs, or am I just trying to force myself to like it? I was just so like, this sounds terrible to say, but like I felt nothing listening to this album. I was just like
Mm.
I was just in a state of like existence. It was just like this music is going in one ear and out the other.
Hmm.
And it just was not clicking with me in the slightest. That did change with Zen and Cypher. With Zen, I enjoyed it for the most part up until you get that like 2-minute instrumental fade out at the end, and I'm like, do I actually want to hear this again? I don't know, maybe not. Cypher and Enamorata are the two songs that I added to my playlist after this album. Both of those have enough redeeming qualities for me to go back to them at least a handful of times, but really they're just like in my playlist is like proof that I listened to this album and I didn't entirely hate it.
Yeah. Well,
I really haven't gone back to it very much, and it's
well, I think all that it would be one thing if you were saying it about a different album, but I think that that's in the nature of it being experimental, is that it's just not going to be for everybody. I mean,
Yeah.
and I mean,
like
I've tried
even
listening to Northlane stuff before. Like, you guys have sent me songs off of Alien, and I think some of their older stuff, and none of it's ever really clicked with me. So I'm not necessarily surprised
yeah.
by this reaction,
And
but I'm glad I at least gave it a shot.
yeah, and I have the same sentiment as you. I think for a lot of these songs on here, I feel like I can speak highly of it as an album and still be like, yeah, I'm indifferent hearing some of these things. Like Echo Chamber. I think particularly for me, stands out as something that I'm just entirely ambivalent about. Like, yeah, I don't know. I appreciate the album for what it is and what I think it'll do for the genre. I got a couple songs out of it. I'm happy. I'm happy I got my couple of songs.
I
I'll
also
take it.
think for me, as someone that's not really a fan of this band very much, the fact that this album is as long as it is, I believe it's like, what, 56 minutes long?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a long
Yeah.
album.
If you're not
So-
invested in what you're hearing, it's gonna be
When I'm
a
when
long
I'm
listen.
like when I'm 7 tracks in on Is This a Test, and I'm like half an hour into an album listen, and I could have listened to that Short Stack album in full by that point,
Yeah.
and I'm just like, it's going in one ear and out the other, and I'm just like not invested in it. And
Yeah.
even when it gets better in some songs like Cypher and Enamorata, it's not enough for me to get. At that point, I'm just like almost so jaded by the experience that like I can't get reinvested into it. When the first 7 tracks of this album just leave me nothing. Not to say it's a bad album. That's just my personal take on it. Obviously, this band is big enough to be pulling this type of an audience for a reason. So
Yeah, if nothing else, I'm excited to see where they go after this. The influences in other bands aside, the influence on their own sound. Where it's experimental enough that I'm wondering where do we go next, and I'm kind of excited to see it because I'm seeing glimpses, even if I didn't enjoy the album as a whole, I'm seeing glimpses of a lot of things I enjoyed here. I'm just like, okay, I'm tentatively hopeful for future Northlane releases to maybe go back to that same level of enjoyment that I get out of Mesmer or Node.